And I think that you have a government where you have cutlasses being taxed, condoms being taxed, and even savings. There was a 1% imposition on savings, which was later withdrawn.
Investments,
which was later. I mean, even to think about it it's
been suspended.
It's been suspended. But even to think about it.
Oh, it's now abolished, is it?
Okay, good. Yeah, but even to think about it, it doesn't. It just questions who are making these policies.
But isn't it just another way?
Another way of raising revenue.
Well, yes,
but when you become desperate, this is what happens. That when you've mismanaged the economy into this hole, then anything sounds great to you because you don't have any option.
The MPP will shift the focus of economic policy away from taxation to production. So we are going to move away from taxation to production. Taxation.
Yeah, the vice president. Again, I don't know how many minutes we have, but I explained the issue of what happened with condoms and all those things, but we know what is going on today. But frankly, if you look at the number of levies, that have been imposed today, in comparison, with, the 4 which I mentioned, which all had sunset 3, which all had sunset clauses. The verdict is there. It was a lie. I'm looking for trying to be not to be very harsh with my language. It was completely because at the time we had done, as I said, there was a fiscal stabilization levy and there was the temporary imports duty which they took on and they continued with it. Even after they came to power, they couldn't take them off. As for the blame game, today he's blaming GRA. So you see, right? Why don't you go to evaluate your performance? Right? Just as you were evaluating your predecessor's performance. Now you are blaming the agency that is under the Ministry of Finance. Right? Which doesn't set the targets. They contribute in setting the target. The ultimate decision is the Ministry of Finance. They contribute in the sense that they hold a database, right, for all the taxes because they are in the field, they are collecting. And they help with the projection. Let me clarify this because it's creating some confusion that I was also saying that GRA, says no. I'm saying that during the budget hearing, just like we meet all agencies with their ministries, GRA is an agency of the Ministry of Finance. And what does GRA do? GRA collects taxes with the government mandates. And GRA has a very elaborate database which they started setting up for ERP SAP. And so if you are going to implement a policy, GRA can go in and tell you the effect of that policy. GRA can tell you that this is the trend, of performance, both nominal and real, right? And therefore, Minister, if you are going to implement this, this is the effect. For example, the benchmark which he was talking about, which he said they changed it to just a benchmark, reduction of the value. Remember he said they were going to abolish import duty. How do you do that as a developing country? You remember what I explained already? You want to open up, and what they did when they came to power, was to reduce the value of imports. You remember the cost I was talking about? If you reduce the value of imports, from 100 to 50, if you're supposed to 10%, you're supposed to collect 10, you collect 5. And that's how come the whole system was stagnant, because you never. And what do? You encourage others, even people who are importing to Burkina Faso and others, using our ports, to take advantage of this and smuggling the goods and all that, right? So I think that some of these things are just things which I say. In any event, like the amnesty, which I said, there was an amnesty in 2017. Tell us how that amnesty performed. There was a benchmark. Today is repeating the same thing on import duties and all those things. Tell us, the import duties that we waived, from auto to everything, yes, some are needed for incentives. And where is the accountability for it? And you go back here, you blame GRA, you continue blaming President Mahama, and the rest. In any event, we did not increase the tax rates. The tax rates were increased by this administration. The personal income tax and the corporate income tax, which has been increased, to 35%, they were 25%. So they increased it. The VAT we were talking about, you remove a VAT, you say it's not part of VAT, then you increase the VAT rate, and that rate, continues to be part of the system. That's what we should be talking about. So they increased the VAT rate. We didn't increase it. They removed it and denied input tax credit. I said in my earlier introduction that, when I was talking about ERP, SAP, and what we did, the corporate income tax rate used to be at 55 and 65%. And they were brought down gradually over a decade until we got to the 20-25%, which they have now come after 40 years to increase to 35. And yes, still, the highest point, this year they said it will be the record, but the highest point of tax to GDP ratio is 2015. Despite all the levies and things that have been, the highest point, the data is there, is 2015. So what have they achieved with all the increases in taxes and other things? So Randy, let me also address this issue of investment. You see, it was a policy discussion that was taking place in many countries. When you invest in T-bill, when you invest in even the stock market, corporate, and others, the investment is not tax. We're not talking about the investment. But the income you are earning, right? The income you are earning, right, is income. And the debate is, if you sell, we'll exclude residential housing. But if you invest in commercial property and you sell it, you pay capital gains tax. It's on the books. That's your form of investment, right? It's a house. Sorry, an office building which you want to rent because residential, as I said, is excluded. What is the difference then between another taxpayer? Fairness is a very important principle in taxation. How about a person who puts his money in investments in the form of paper investments, securities, bonds, and the rest? We are not talking about, as for your house, you pay rent tax. It's another form of income when you sell it. So we are saying when you liquidate the capital gains or the income you are earning, at the moment it's blanket. And we are saying that this was blanket at a time when the government needed money, back in the 60s and 70s, when the tax regime hadn't matured. So as part of the discussion, is it time to rethink some of these things? Because as your economy changes, at the moment services, who spoke about services back in the even 70s and 80s, right? Started from the early 1990s into the 2000 services sector and the rest, right? And that also leads to another one, which is we were not going to tax interest because interest is on your savings. It's not income you are going to save. What we're going to tax under the VAT, which they are reintroducing in various ways, is ATM. If you go to use an ATM, is this a service? How is it different from architects giving you advice? Right? So it is a fee that you pay for ATM and for all those financial services that, is the target of the tax. So it's not savings. Right? So, but it's very easy to pick these things. And you see that now they've come and from e-levy to everything, the same notion is coming in, but in different forms. Why don't you straight the VAT? You remove VAT and you talk about e-levy. The e-levy actually taxes the money in your wallet which you transfer, not the fee, not just the fee. That's one of the handicaps of this thing. But we are saying, we are not targeting your interest. It's savings. Under VAT, it's not consumption, it's savings. Until you take that interest and you go and buy a commodity or something, then we tax it. But when you take that interest and you go, in an advanced economy like ours, and you go and use the ATM, you are using the services of additional services.
Okay, let's quickly move to the former finance minister. He speaks about 10 billion cedis on interest, no fiscal space, the exchange rate. He speaks about also thinking that you can borrow your way out of a messy situation, a value for money.
That's what I said. I mean, I have just one explanation. He couldn't hear himself.
He couldn't hear himself.
Heal himself. Because he has done Westerns, isn't it?
Really?
Of course he is. Look at we left, of course he's using nominal values. So you can translate the debt at 100%. We never go to 95%.
Just COVID and Russia, Ukraine.
We never go to 95% anyway. I already explained COVID and Russia. What about all the money that flowed in? What did you do with them to resolve them? What did you do? Why did you prepare for COVID instead of understating so that you put more money into the stabilization fund and don't go and be borrowing, as we were attempting to do?
Exchange rate.
Exchange rate. What's the exchange rate today? And by the way, the 1.2 is talking about, remember the redenomination had just taken place 2 years ago. Yes. So you can say that within 1.5 years, they had increased it by 0.2. And you could have seen the trajectory, that was being followed. If the thing is 1 to 1, in fact, it was 90 point something to 1. And then within 1.5 years of taking over, it's moved to 0.2. I think the evidence is there. The rate of the disease.
What do you make of the conduct of the central bank in all of this?
Who bowed on the central bank? That's my question. Who put pressure on the central bank to do the deficit financing?
The central bank says
it's not a decision that the governor.
The central bank says that by law,
5%.
It says they say by law they are enjoined to come in and salvage the economy. Whatever they did was to save the economy.
Well, yes, I know the economic emergency that they declared, and I know there are lawyers who disputed it anyway. And maybe we need to revisit that, because if the governor can take that decision, in spite of all the other flows, then maybe it needs to go to Parliament, and I say in all honesty, for them to review, the conditions under which, the governor has that power, right? But I would have thought that the more sober, relatively speaking, speeches that were given, when things were getting out of hand in Legon and other places, I sat in there. The more sober, reflected what actually happened. The one that was delivered in Legon, and then the one that was delivered, at the annual meeting of the managers of banks at Aliza Hotel. I find that to be more reflective of the pressure that, the fiscal authorities were bringing to bear, on the governor to monetize the economy. I don't respect the governors. Some of them, as I said, governors were contemporary, more or less, because he was in the research department at the time. I knew him very well. I know Maxwell very well, and I know them. I mean, in terms of their, qualification and expertise and all that. And Maxwell had done missions like I did at Fund and the rest. So I would put more premium on those sober reflections that he did as a warning to the government that the fiscal was getting out of hand. Because you couldn't even, how many countries financed the third deficit? Was it only Ghana that was affected by COVID? That's a question which even lay people ask. Was it only Ghana that was affected by COVID? And remember what I said. The fund is now saying there were pre-existing conditions, before COVID. So if we got all this money to resolve COVID, was the additional financing actually meant to resolve those pre-existing conditions, which some of us have said for a very long time? So that's an open question.